Hey, good morning, everybody. We're in a series this week on looking at fasting. And for the next 3 days, I want to give you basically 3 ways of thinking about fasting that our author introduces that I think are really very helpful. The first one is this: fasting is a form of preemptive suffering. In fasting, we don't wait around for suffering, we actually preemptively embrace it. We voluntarily make an intentional choice to temporarily, for a specified period of time, reduce our comfort in one of the areas that we looked at. Now, the question is, why in the world would anyone do that? We hate suffering. We do everything we can to avoid it. But when suffering comes, we also know, and it eventually does, that there is a certain value to it. Our author quotes David Brooks, who's an op-ed writer for the New York Times, who did an article with the intriguing title, "What's the Key to a Meaningful Life?" And the subtitle was, "You Might Not Like the Answer." He asked this question. He said, if you were to ask somebody, what has made you who you are? What experience, what activity has helped you to become the person that you are? He said, no one's going to say, we had a fabulous vacation in Maui. That's not going to happen. But what they would probably say is, I went through a very trying time in my life. I was diagnosed with cancer. I lost a loved one. I battled through an addiction. It's always in those adversities or those hardships, it's those painful times in our lives in which we begin to develop a personal depth and richness in our character that you often don't get any other way. So fasting becomes a way, you see, in which I reduce my comfort and actually embrace suffering in a kind of voluntary, temporary way to begin to just, encourage that kind of depth in my own life. Now, it makes me think of a passage in James 2. Where I memorized this as a young Christian in the Phillips paraphrase because I liked it so well. But he says this, he said, when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders. Rather, welcome them as friends. Realize something. Realize that they have come to produce in you a quality. So here's the point. Yes, there's a little bit of pain involved in reducing our comfort in any of these areas, but it is also productive, and that's the reason we're willing to do it. For instance, think of competitive sports. When somebody goes out for football, they understand that two-a-days in the heat of August is going to be difficult. It's going to be painful. There's going to be some adversity. They understand if they go out for football that they're going to go through heartbreaking losses. They're going to get injuries. They're going to, suffer some pain. But they're willing to do it. Why? Because there's another value, you see, that they prize even more. You see the same thing with wrestlers when they, go through food deprivation to make weight. Why? Because there's something that they value even more than the temporary pain of depriving themselves of food. Military service, the same thing. Guys go into the military knowing that it's going to be difficult, that they'll go through seasons of deprivation and sacrifice and hardship. But when they get to be 40 and 50 and 60, they're telling their military stories. Why? Because they have a great pride, and that has shaped their lives in some very significant ways. Even women, they go through childbirth, knowing that childbirth is going to be painful, but they realize the joys of raising children far surpasses the temporary pain that they go through. This all reminds you of that verse in Corinthians where it says, for this temporary suffering cannot be compared to the glory that is to be revealed. Here's what I'd like you to think about. I'd like you to think about fasting as a form of preemptive suffering to gain some greater qualities in life. So begin thinking about that and see if that doesn't encourage and motivate you in trying out some of these practices that help us to live and love like Jesus. Have a great day.